Hercule Poirot sat at his desk, a piece of paper in front of him, his sharp eyes scanning it for the umpteenth time. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting a warm glow that filled the otherwise quiet study. Yet Poirot's mind was far from at ease. His usual air of confidence had been replaced with a slight unease, a feeling he couldn't shake. The case had started innocently enough, a simple inquiry about a man who had come to him for help, but as the minutes stretched into hours, it had morphed into something far more dangerous, something that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Poirot's carefully constructed world. The man who had come to him was Thomas Gibbons, a middle-aged solicitor with a reputation for dealing with the most delicate of matters. Gibbons had been nervous when he entered Poirot's office, his eyes darting around the room, his hands trembling slightly as he handed over a letter. The letter was straightforward, written in an almost perfunctory hand, and yet there was something unsettling about it. The words themselves were simple enough, but the tone behind them spoke of something far darker. "I know what you did, and I know what you're going to do, but I have no intention of letting you live long enough to act on it. I have the truth, Poirot, the truth that you have been hiding from the world." At first, Poirot had brushed it off as the ranting of an unstable mind, the kind of thing he had encountered countless times before. But the more he thought about it, the more the letter troubled him. There was no signature, no way of knowing who had sent it, and yet the mention of his own name, the direct accusation, rang in his ears. What truth was the writer speaking of? What had he done? Poirot was no stranger to danger, but this was something different. This was a threat that seemed to be rooted in the past, a past that Poirot had long since left behind. As Poirot pondered the letter, his mind began to race. Who could this mysterious person be? Why had they come to him now after all these years? And more importantly, why had they chosen to target him, of all people? The letter had made one thing clear. Whoever this was, they knew something about him. Something that had been hidden, buried deep in the recesses of his memory. Poirot stood up from his desk, his sharp mind already working through the possibilities. He would have to speak with Gibbons again to learn more about the context of the letter, to see if there was anything else the solicitor could tell him. Perhaps, Poirot mused, it was merely a case of someone trying to cause trouble, but deep down, he knew that this felt different. This was not just another trivial puzzle to solve. This was something far more personal, something that could bring to light secrets he had spent years keeping hidden. He called for his trusted companion, Captain Hastings, to join him. Hastings had been at Poirot's side for many years, and though he was no detective, his presence was often invaluable in situations like this. Hastings had always admired Poirot's brilliance, but there was something about the way Poirot had been acting these past few days that unsettled him. The detective, usually so calm and composed, had become visibly agitated, his mind racing, consumed by thoughts of the unknown. When Hastings arrived, he found Poirot pacing in his study, his brow furrowed in concentration. Poirot stopped mid-step as he saw Hastings enter, and for the first time he spoke the words aloud that had been circling in his mind. "Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low and serious, "I have made a grave mistake. There is a puzzle before me, one that I should have solved long ago, but I have allowed it to slip from my grasp. Now it has returned with a vengeance, and I fear that I am in more danger than I anticipated." Hastings listened carefully, his expression shifting from confusion to concern, as Poirot recounted the events of the past few days, the mysterious letter, and the strange feeling of being watched. Hastings, though still perplexed, could sense the urgency in Poirot's tone, the gravity of the situation. There was no doubt that this was no ordinary case. This was a matter that went deeper than simple deduction. Poirot was facing something from his past, something that had resurfaced to haunt him. Poirot continued, his voice growing firmer as he spoke. "You see, Hastings, the man who sent that letter knows something about me. He knows of a mistake I made, a decision I regret, and now he intends to use that against me. He has left me." Hastings could sense the conflict in his friend's words. Poirot, the brilliant detective who had solved countless cases, was now faced with a puzzle that he could not solve with logic alone. The fear that Poirot felt was not one of his usual apprehensions. This was something different. This was a fear that came from within, from a past that Poirot had long since closed the door on. Poirot turned to Hastings, his face set in determination. "I must go to Gibbons again. There are answers there, I am sure of it. But this time, Hastings, I will not be looking for just any answer. I will be looking for the one that leads me to the truth." The two men set out immediately, Poirot's mind sharp and focused as they made their way to Gibbons' office. The journey was uneventful, but as they approached the building, Poirot felt a growing sense of unease. The feeling that something was about to happen, something he could not control, had been gnawing at him ever since he received that letter. And now, as they entered Gibbons' office, the tension in the air was palpable. Gibbons sat behind his desk, his face pale, his hands clasped tightly together. When he saw Poirot enter, he immediately stood, his eyes wide with fear. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice shaking, "you must leave this case alone. You do not understand what you are dealing with." Poirot moved forward, his eyes narrowing. "I understand more than you think, Gibbons, and I intend to solve this, whether you like it or not." Gibbons trembled, but he did not resist. "The man who has sent you those letters," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He knows everything. He knows about your past, about the secret you've been hiding all these years." Poirot's heart skipped a beat. The truth was finally coming to light, but it was not the truth he had wanted. The pieces were falling into place, and with them came a realization that struck deep into his core. He had spent years trying to outrun his past, but now it seemed that the past had finally caught up with him. The door to the office suddenly slammed open, and a figure appeared in the doorway. It was the man from the letter, the one who had been stalking Poirot in the shadows. He stepped forward, his face obscured by the dim light, but Poirot could see the malicious intent in his eyes. And then the man spoke the words that would change everything. "It's time, Poirot. Time to face what you've been avoiding." Poirot felt the weight of those words settle over him. The game was no longer about solving a puzzle. It was about survival. The man who knew too much was not just an enemy. He was a force that had come to destroy everything Poirot held dear. The danger was real. The stakes were higher than ever before. But Poirot had never been one to back down from a challenge. If anything, this case had reignited the fire inside him. It was not just about solving a mystery anymore. It was about proving that he was still the master of the puzzle, that he could still outwit the most dangerous of foes. With a steely resolve, Poirot stepped forward, his mind already working through the possibilities.